In today's lecture, we're going to talk about nutrient management plans. These are probably the most important tools that farmers have in order to minimize their impact on the environment. We'll come back to nutrient management plans multiple times through the semester. Before I get started, I do need to recognize Dean Gall, a retired nutrient management planner, formerly with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. He generously shared most of these slides with me. Done right, nutrient management planning results in beautiful vistas like this, with healthy crops and minimal impact on water quality. There are three very important disciplines for developing a nutrient management plan, and all three are important. Those disciplines are agronomics, economics, and environmental science. The nutrient management plan itself has 6 components, and we will talk through each of these 6 because they're all so important. The first is soil productivity, then soil fertility. We also have to consider the application of manure or biosolids, organic sources of nutrients. A fourth component is crop rotation, then application of commercial fertilizer to meet any remaining needs. And finally, perhaps most important, is the catch-all category of management practices. Soils on farms vary widely in their inherent capacity to support yield. We call this trait soil productivity, and the USDA made a major investment across the last century in mapping all of the soils in the U.S. for their soil productivity. And so you can go on the web and you can find your farm or a piece of land that you're interested in, and you can find the soil survey for that farm, and you'll see that it is coded with different soil productivity groups. This is incredibly useful information. We classify soils into 5 productivity groups, where Group 1 is the most productive soil for a particular crop, and Group 5 is the least productive soil. And it's important to realize that soils can be highly productive for one crop, but not for another crop. So you have to look at which crop you plan to plant on a particular piece of land in order to interpret its soil productivity. We say that land that is in soil productivity group 1 for corn has the inherent capacity to produce 160 bushels an acre of corn. And this is the inherent capacity of the soil if we fertilize and manage it correctly. On the other hand, there are going to be fields on your farm, maybe rocky fields that can't hold any water, and it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you throw at them. We'll call them soil productivity group 5, and they're just not going to support the yields that a more productive soil could. This photo is a classic example of land within very close proximity that varies widely in yield. In this case, the bottomland on the left is highly productive for corn, but the land on the slope of the hill there is not at all productive, would be soil productivity 5. And so frankly, it's not worth trying to grow corn there. Classically, bottomlands, land down near a stream, near a body of water, are highly productive, whereas more eroded lands on the side of hills or the tops of hills are less productive. Let me show you a series of photos of soil profiles that vary in their productivity. Remember that soil productivity is the inherent capacity of soil to support yield. It has a lot to do with the soil's water-holding capacity. And the ability of a soil to hold water has a lot to do with its organic matter content. In this photo, you can see the 6-inch soil probe there. And after you get past the top couple of inches, you can see a dramatic change in the soil with less organic matter below. And so this is not going to be as productive a soil as the one we'll see in the next slide. Obviously, this is a soil profile with a lot more organic matter in it, a much higher water holding capacity, and therefore a higher productivity. And this soil profile, I guess I'm going to ask you to guess which productivity classification it falls in. The water holding capacity of this soil, I guess we could call it, is going to be minimal. And so its productivity for growing most crops is going to be very, very low. And again, just take a look at this and understand the concept that it doesn't matter how well we fertilize this particular soil. We can throw all the fertilizer at it that we have. It's still not going to support yield. That's an inherent characteristic of the soil. So soil productivity is an inherent trait of the soil, and you can learn the productivity of your soils for different crops by looking it up on the internet using the soil surveys that the USDA has done. The second key component of a nutrient management plan is very different, and that's the nutrient level in the soil. How do we determine nutrient levels in the soil? We test the soil. These nutrient levels can change over time. They can change depending on the amount of fertilizer, the amount of manures that you're applying to the land, the amount of nutrients that the crop pulls from the land. So you have to test your soils. This photo is our friend Dean Gall from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation out taking soil samples on the field. We recommend taking soil samples every 3 years and analyzing them for phosphorus and potassium. So we've taken our soil samples and we've sent them off to the lab and received back information on the soil fertility. So let's just take a minute and do some agronomy 101. Depending on the fertility of your soil, you're going to need to fertilize to meet the nutrient needs of your crops. How do you know the nutrient needs of the crops? Well, this varies with a number of factors, most obviously by the crop. Crops like alfalfa and other legumes don't need supplemental nitrogen because they can fix nitrogen from the air and convert it into plant-usable nitrogen. On the other hand, corn and other grasses don't have this capacity, and so they need nitrogen. The nutrient needs of the crops, especially for nitrogen, also varies by yield, and we estimate yield from soil productivity, or farm records if you happen to have good records going back several years on yield from your fields. But generally speaking, and when you're starting out, you're going to look at those soil survey maps, you're going to identify the soil productivity group of your particular soils, and then use that to estimate the yield of the crop that you're planting in that field. One just quick terminology lesson. There are 3 common ways to apply commercial fertilizer to crops, and those are to broadcast, to band, and to side dress. Broadcast application is exactly what it sounds like, spread across the field, pre-plant. Banding is a more precise application of a thin band of the fertilizer adjacent to the seed. Side dressing is kind of like topping off. It's something you do partway through the season. If there are tests that can tell you if the plant needs this or not, and so you come in and would then apply fertilizer just very close to the base of the plants. So broadcast, band, and side dress. In any discipline, knowing the correct terminology is important. Most dairy and livestock producers look to manure as the first source of nutrients that they'll apply to their crops. Manure is a real resource, a valuable resource when used wisely, but we've got to use it wisely, and the first step is to know what nutrients are in the manure. Here is our friend Dean Gall again. He is sampling manure, and again, we'll send that off to the lab and get back a nutrient analysis that will tell him what's in the manure. And then, through his nutrient management plan, he'll calculate how much manure to apply to meet the nutrient needs of the crops without exceeding them. One side note on manure analysis, obviously you can see that this truck is ready to apply manure, and there's Dean Gall pulling a manure sample right now. Well, those results aren't going to be back for a few days at best, whereas this truck is ready to apply. So what do? Typically what we do is we use last year's analysis. So what he's sampling for now, he'll have analyzed, and we'll use that information in next year. Now, with scientific advances, we are moving toward being able to do real-time nutrient analysis of manure, which would be a great step forward. It is important to analyze the manure because its nutrient content can vary widely from farm to farm, and there are several factors that affect this. The one that's most near and dear to my heart, I suppose, is the composition of the diet fed to the animals. Diet matters. What we put in the front end of the animal really influences what comes out the back end of the animal. Phosphorus is a classic example of this. If we feed diets that are high in phosphorus, most of that phosphorus comes right out the other end, and you'll end up with a manure that is higher in phosphorus than if you were just feeding the cows at their requirement. For phosphorus especially, this is a problem because we'll quickly end up over-applying phosphorus to crops, and we can unintentionally cause some negative environmental impacts. So work closely with your nutritionist. If you've got pigs or beefers or broilers or dairy cattle, work closely with your nutritionist to formulate a diet that meets, without exceeding, the nutrient needs of your animals. How we store the manure also matters. Some forms of storage lead to greater nutrient losses than others. Composting, for instance, when we turn the compost to lead to a nice stable compost, we are losing a lot of nitrogen as ammonia. And so typically, when it comes time to figure out manure applications, we sample the manure when it's coming out of the storage, not when it comes out of the animal, because it'll change a great deal during storage. Here's an example of dry stack manure storage. This is at the Virginia Tech campus, and this stacked manure is a combination of horse manure, beef manure, a little bit of poultry litter, and some dairy calf manure. This photo is of an in-ground tank that is storing liquid manure anaerobically on a dairy farm. It's appropriate to call this an anaerobic storage tank. This is not a lagoon. A lagoon's got a very specific meaning. I'll come back to that in a minute. This is an in-ground manure storage pit, and it looks like it's just a hole in the ground that the farmer has poured manure into, but it's actually lined carefully with a clay liner, and we test these to be sure that the clay liner is impermeable before we store manure in it. And again, so this is an anaerobic storage pit. This is a manure lagoon on a hog farm, and a lagoon is specifically designed to facilitate treatment of the liquid manure. And so this is a shallow lagoon with a great deal of surface area, and so there's a lot of aerobic activity, and this is specifically designed to treat the manure, to change its composition between coming out of the barn and going onto the fields. So we have designed our diets appropriately, and we have stored the manure appropriately, and now it's time to land apply. With liquid manure especially, very important to agitate it so that the material becomes more homogeneous before you land apply it. This is typically done in the anaerobic storage pits or tanks, not necessarily done with the lagoons. Usually in the lagoons, they're deliberately trying to get a sludge to settle down to the bottom, and they're only going to land apply the water. But with dairy manure, as is in this photo, we agitate before we land apply to make sure that we're getting all the solids out of there and that we've got a nice homogeneous mixture. In nutrient management planning, there are a lot of things that seem like little things, but they're really not little things. Application pattern is one of them. You can see as this truck is going down the field, it's spreading the manure in a fairly even pattern, but you got to pay attention to how wide that pattern is so that when he turns around and comes back, he's aligned with the previous stripe that he laid down. Otherwise, you could end up with wide variations in nutrient application one part of the field to the other. The previous slide showed a truck that was really doing a good job with a nice even application. I would say that this truck and trailer not doing as good a job with an even application. You look down the sides of the pattern and you can see that the manure is more densely applied on the edges than in the middle, so that's a problem. Another little thing that isn't is calibrating the manure spreader. Why do you think we would need to calibrate the manure spreader? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is knowing how much manure the spreader is applying per acre or per linear foot. And again, it's really important because it can vary between spreaders. And if you accidentally, back your manure application truck into a post or into a barn and dent it, you can really affect the amount of manure that comes out per linear foot as you go down the field. So it's very important to calibrate your manure spreaders. So how do you calibrate your manure spreader? A couple of different ways. You see in the lower right, that box spreader land applying some dry manure. They've actually just spread a tarpaulin on the ground. Do you see that? And so they'll pull the manure spreader across the tarpaulin. They'll put the tractor will be in whatever gear they intend to use when they land apply the manure. And so after they pull the spreader across the tarpaulin, they'll just pick up the tarpaulin and weigh it. And in that way, they can figure out, all right, it spread 100 pounds of manure on this tarpaulin, which might be 10 foot by 12 foot. Then they are able to extrapolate out how many pounds or tons of manure that manure spreader will spread per acre, per unit of space, per acre of land. In the upper right, our friend Dean Gall is demonstrating how you do this with a liquid manure spreader. So liquid manure spreaders, you know what the volume is. Typically, they're going to be 3,000 gallons or 4,000 gallons, maybe 6,000 gallons would be a pretty big liquid manure spreader. And so what they've done is just emptied the spreader, just pulled the truck across the field in first gear, whatever gear they're going to use, and just spread it. Now, what Dean is doing is literally measuring the perimeter of the band of manure that came out of that 3,000-gallon manure truck. And so he's going to calculate, and if that pattern is an acre, then he knows that that particular truck spreads at 3,000 gallons per acre. He went in first gear. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about management decisions that the producer has to make when she's applying nutrients, whether from manure or commercial fertilizer. These include where to apply, when to apply, and how to apply, and brings into play labor and equipment opportunities and limitations. While some areas of the country feature wonderfully flat ground, for many producers, sloped ground is a fact of life. Soil and nutrients on hillsides are especially vulnerable to runoff. How to manage this? Strip cropping, as shown here, is one approach. This producer is planting corn in strips between rows of something sod-forming, maybe a perennial grass or a perennial legume. In this way, any runoff or erosion from the annual crop, the corn, will be trapped by the sod-forming crop, minimizing nutrient runoff from the field. Practices like this are critical to the environmental goals of nutrient management planning. You see at the bottom of this photo here, there's clearly a creek or a stream running through, and we need to prevent nutrients from reaching that. Management decisions that a producer has to make, one of the most important is when to apply fertilizer. In an ideal world, we'd supply the plant with the nutrients it needs exactly when it needs it, but this isn't practical. Usually when the plant is in a rapid phase of growth, driving a tractor over it to fertilize will damage the crop. But we've got to try something. On most dairy and livestock farms, the manure storage system needs to be emptied in the fall, and so we apply manure nutrients in the fall. But in most climates, there's little crop growth in late fall and through the winter. So these nutrients that we apply in the fall are at real risk of leaching and runoff. One of the best things we can do is to follow fall manure application with planting what we call a cover crop, a grain or a grass that has some cold tolerance. So it'll begin growing in late fall, go dormant, and grow again as soon as the ground thaws. Through the winter, the roots of these crops provide some protection against soil erosion. Also, these crops hit their maximum growth phase in March and April, which is exactly when spring thaw and spring rains can lead to runoff and leaching. These cover crops, some call them trap crops, take up the nutrients, preventing their loss. This figure is of the growth phase and resulting nitrogen requirement of a small grain, a cereal grain. And we can either harvest this, at which point we would call this double cropping, or we can just plant our summer crop directly into them. So we can kill this small grain and just plant the corn directly into it. One factor that can provide either opportunities or impose limitations is the equipment availability on the farm. We talked earlier about the 3 different ways to apply commercial fertilizer, and broadcasting certainly is the easiest, but then it's a lot of nutrients that are applied away from where the actual plant is going to grow. If our corn planter has fertilizer boxes, as shown in this photo, we've got the opportunity to do banding, which is applying a narrow strip of fertilizer right next to the seed as we plant the seed. So we are targeting the nutrients exactly where they're needed. We're doing 2 jobs at once, fertilizing and planting, so minimizing the number of times we have to run the tractor across the field. So in this situation, if you've got a planter equipped with fertilizer boxes, that's a real opportunity. On a related note, we can estimate the total nitrogen need of a crop from tabular values. But if the field has received manure in previous years, or if it was planted in a legume in previous years, there's some nitrogen already in the field, in the soil. Some, but not all, of that nitrogen will become available to the plant during the year. It's an advantage then to divide or split your application of nitrogen especially. Put on some portion of it, maybe half of it, up front when you're planting, and then come back partway through the season. Try to figure out if the plant really is going to need the remaining nitrogen fertilizer, and then apply only as much as the crop is going to need. Producers who are planting corn can take advantage of something called the pre-sidedress nitrate test. And so with this practice, you'd apply some portion of the nitrogen requirement when you plant, and then you'd come back when the corn is about 1 foot tall and test the soil. And the test is actually for nitrogen, a plant-available form of nitrate. And the premise is that if the nitrogen concentration in the soil is high enough at that point in time, you may not need to apply all or even any of the remaining nitrogen. So this pre-sidedress nitrate test lets you determine how much nitrogen your corn really needs, and if it needs some, then you're going to come in and you're going to side dress it, special equipment, where you're again laying down the fertilizer right next to the stalk of the plants. Soil conservation, the prevention of soil erosion, is a tremendously important goal and a key part of the nutrient management plan. And practices like no-till, literally not tilling to avoid breaking up the surface of the soil, have real advantages. But again, there are trade-offs. Tilling the ground in the fall allows it to warm up and dry out faster the following spring, so you can get into the field sooner. On another note, a lot of the practices we can use to optimize yield involve running a tractor across the field, applying lime, tilling, spraying, fertilizer. If we're doing a split application fertilizer, that means another running the tractor across the field. The problem is that every time we do this, we are compacting soil, and soil that is compacted will not support optimum yield. Now, we can loosen compacted soil by tilling it, but as we've talked about, this is counter to the goals of controlling soil erosion. This business of being a farmer is complicated stuff. There's a lot of trade-offs that you've got to figure out. Subjects for a minute and talk more about grazing. On dairy and livestock farms that allow their animals access to the field, we need to consider ways to minimize the damage they can do to the field as they come and go. The creation of hardened travel lanes, as seen here, can prevent the kind of muddy mess that can happen as cows come and go, reducing potential runoff from the fields. Now, if you are grazing, how are you going to manage the pasture? First of all, is it going to need fertilizer, or will the manure of the grazing animals be enough? And how will you subdivide the pastures? Will you utilize rotational grazing, subdividing into paddocks, moving cows between paddocks, to provide the animals with grass in the vegetative stage, the most nutritious phase, and also allowing the paddocks to rest and regrow between grazing bouts? This seems like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you do rotational grazing? But remember, always there's trade-offs. There's expense involved in terms of fencing and in terms of the labor needed to move cows. So yet another management decision to make. These two guys are scouting for pests, scouting for insects, trying to see what's out there. This allows producers to minimize the use of herbicides, an economic issue. But this also has environmental implications. Insect damage reduces yields. Now, when we calculate the nutrient application, we assume that we're going to grow and harvest the maximum yield that field can grow, and remember that's based on its soil productivity. So if we know that this field, maybe it's bottomland down near the stream, is soil productivity group 1, and I've got corn planted in there, I'm excited. I'm going to get 160 bushels an acre or more, and I'm going to fertilize to support that yield. So anything that reduces that yield means that I've applied more nutrients than the crop will use. Unused nutrients are vulnerable to runoff and leaching. So practices like scouting for pests and optimizing the use of herbicides will allow for that expression of maximum yield and use the nutrients that I've put down. Now that we're at the end of this presentation, I want to give you some study questions, some take-home points that I think you should have gotten from this talk. The first is, how is soil productivity reported? What does soil productivity mean? What does it reflect? Second question, how do we measure soil fertility? The third question is all dairy manure the same? Why or why not? Also, how do you calibrate a manure spreader? Why would you calibrate a manure spreader? Kind of a dirty job. And now maybe the biggest question, all right, you know your soil, you know your manure, you're ready to apply. What else do you need to decide? There's a lot of management decisions to be made, right? And one of those management decisions, are there ways to let your crop tell you how much fertilizer it needs? Dig into these questions and you'll be in good shape for the exam. Thanks, guys. Isn't this pretty? This is what it looks like when you do it right.